Order. First thing we'll do is welcome you guys, Robert and Lynn. Thank you. We're really excited to have you here. First thing we do is a roll call and pledge allegiance. So let's do the roll call real quick. Just maybe you could start us off, Robert.
Sure. Robert Creasy here.
Lynn here.
Kelly Toon here.
And Ken here. And then let's stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. And I get a flag on my screen here.
Of the
United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Always like my flag on here on Zoom, Madison. Thank you.
Of course.
The next thing we have is we have in front of us. We have in the packet the minutes from our last meeting, yes.
I need an approval of the agenda first, please.
Oh, I skipped over that. Sorry about that. First thing we're going to do is approve the agenda. Has everybody had a chance to take a look at it? Are there any edits, additions? Otherwise, I'll take a motion to approve it.
I make a motion to approve the minutes of, I can't.
The agenda.
The agenda, but can I? Oh, agenda I can, yes. Tuesday,
Yes.
August 20th, 2024 for the Historical Preservation Commission meeting.
I'll second that.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All right, motion carries. All right, next item is the approval of the minutes from our July 16th meeting. Those were in the packet. I'm not sure how we do this, Madison, but do we have Lynn and Robert participate in it?
Yes, they have to because they make up the quorum, but they cannot
Okay.
make the motion since they were not in attendance at those meetings as members of the board. So either you or Kelly will have to make the motion.
Okay, all right. Are there any edits or comments to the minutes? If not, I'm looking for a motion to approve.
A motion to approve the minutes.
All right, I second that. All in favor?
Aye.
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 Aye. Okay, motion carries. Next item of business is just, do we have any conflicts of interest related to business that's on the agenda today?
Do you want to explain how I function?
Sure. So there are no technical conflicts of interest tonight. So we could just leave it at that, but just to give you some context, since Lynn also serves on the Planning Commission when it comes to things that go before both HPC and Planning Commission, such as the ordinance that will be addressed tonight, she'll essentially have to pick one board to weigh in on, and the other board she will have to recuse herself from. So in this case, I believe she's choosing to weigh in on the ordinance tonight, which means that she will be recusing herself from the ordinance at Planning Commission next week. So that is how that is going to go for the foreseeable future until I am told otherwise by the town attorney.
Great. Well, then we're certainly happy to have you, and we're glad you're going to be able to participate tonight. There being no other conflicts of interest to declare, we'll move on to public comments. Do we have any public comments from the audience or online?
We do not.
Okay. Then we'll move on to special presentations, of which we have none.
That's correct.
And so we'll move on to the business items. And I'll turn it over to Madison to talk about those items.
Sure. So the first one that we have on the agenda is the appointment of the HPC chair. Ken is obviously filling that role right now as just a way to run this meeting. But technically with the new appointments, that year term is up and it is up to the HPC Commission to appoint a new chair. Now, if y'all would like to continue with Ken, that's perfectly fine. I just need a motion and a second and a vote. But it is something that y'all decide on yourselves. Somebody nominates Ken, somebody seconds that nomination, and then y'all vote, or whoever. I'm using Ken as the example because he's the current chair.
Yeah.
I make the motion to nominate Ken
Well-
as.
Well, is there anybody else? Okay, hold on. Is there anybody else interested in serving as chair? I'm delighted to have the role. It comes with all kinds of extra pay, but no, seriously, is there anyone that would be interested? Because I would like to relinquish it if it's something that somebody else is interested. Otherwise, I'm happy also to carry on.
I'd just like to say I've been quite happy having you as a chair.
So am I, and I don't think it would be proper for me to do it here and on P and Z.
Okay.
And I feel
All right.
a little new to the game, so I'd rather watch how things roll first.
Okay.
So, Ken, are you comfortable with continuing the role?
Yes. Yeah, I'd be willing to do that. Yes.
Then I second Lynn's proposal. Or did you already second?
Nope.
No.
Don't have a second. So, motion by Lynn, second by Robert. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay. Ken, you are reappointed as the HPC chair.
Okay.
You also
All
forgot
right.
about, you also get the free parking space outside.
Right.
Oh
yes.
yeah, that's right. Thank you, Kelly. Parking is
We're working on
vital in
getting your
this
name placard out there.
when that happens, that's when I resign. Let's see. Okay, Madison, back to you.
Second on the agenda is the appointment of the HPC vice chair. Again, very similar, since our board allows people to that have a stake to serve in the town, not just residents of the town, to serve on this board. So that could be just property owners, it could be business owners, etc. Oftentimes, like in Ken's example, who often at times attend Zoom, we will need someone who is here more often than not in person to run meetings when Ken can't or is attending online. So that is the primary role of the vice chair. So somebody,
Does anybody, let's start by just seeing, does anybody have an interest in it? Or a willingness?
I don't
Those are
mind.
two different things. Those are two different things.
I have a willingness.
Still learn from the best.
Okay.
Master.
Kelly, how are you? Would you like Robert to do that, or do you have a willingness or interest?
You're welcome to have it.
I'm typically here, except for a few vacations, but always a little shy in front of public. I'm not a natural like you are.
Oh, okay. Well, does that mean you're disinterested and unwilling,
Huh?
or would you rather
I
have
nominate
Robert do it?
Robert for the vice chair.
Okay, I'll second that.
If he's willing to.
I'm willing.
Yeah.
Happy to.
Yeah. I'll second that.
Aye.
So Kelly, you second it?
Sure. Yes.
Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Hey, I just want to make sure, Kelly, that's not something you were interested in, correct?
Like I said, I'll step in if there's an emergency.
Okay. All right.
These are his.
Okay. Okay. All
Let's
right.
go to Robert
He
as the
didn't
vice
tell
chair.
me he gets a hammer. I think I've changed my mind.
Okay. Back to you, Madison.
Okay, so then we come to the meat and potatoes of tonight, Ordinance TBD, Series 2024, and Ordinance amending Chapter 16 zoning and Chapter 19 historic preservation of the Minturn Municipal Code. So I hope y'all read my memo in the packet. It's also been associated, a lot of this verbiage has also been associated with the nominations of 151 and 155 Main Street. So a lot of this shouldn't come as a shock to anybody that we are now discussing this tonight. So you'll find that the ordinance is a little bit odd. It touches on both Chapter 16 and Chapter 19. Y'all do only have purview over Chapter 19. So while y'all can certainly discuss the stuff on Chapter 16, it would be best for a clean record if y'all focused on the chapter that y'all actually have purview over, which is Chapter 19, especially as it relates to the different options. So these options were selected by council at the July 17th work session. There were 7 of them that were picked. A couple of them will not be reflected in this ordinance merely because it's not the appropriate place to do so. For example, to encourage option 4 to encourage historic preservation reinvestment as part of the Downtown Development Authority operations plan. That is something that the DDA will have to decide on their own should that DDA pass within the 100 or within the bounds of the proposed map. And so they'll have to figure out what to do with the money that they generate as part of the tax increment financing. And so while we can certainly encourage them to have historic preservation reinvestment as a priority, that's not something that can be addressed in this ordinance tonight. It's just something to put out there as an encouragement. Another one is to option 6, create a process whereby property owners can determine if their structure would be historically designated without necessarily supporting such a designation. So again, that's not something really that we can address in this ordinance. It's something that we'll just add to the actual application form as a box saying, if you're an owner submitting this nomination, do you support the designation of your structure? Or are you just submitting this information to try and figure out whether or not it's going to be deemed historic, to get that kind of stability. So other than those two options, the rest, options 1 through 3, option 5 and option 7, that should be represented within the ordinance before y'all tonight. So primarily I believe the things that pertain to chapter 19 versus chapter 16 is option 1, to eliminate the requirement for 2 sets of design review guidelines. You'll notice that within the ordinance we have struck through the adoption of the National Park Service design guidelines and merely defaulted to Appendix B Town of Minturn design guidelines, as long as what is proposed fits within the general historic character of the structure. Option 2, eliminating potentially redundant approval requirements. That's another one that pertains to y'all. That is where the altered,
You know, Madison, I'm wondering if we should, I'm sorry to interrupt, but I'm just wondering, just so that we can all follow it, I wonder if we should quickly talk about, do you want to go through all of them and then talk about them, or do it sequentially? I'm wondering.
we can certainly do it sequentially. If you want to talk about option 1 first, we can get
Well,
your
I'm
comments.
gonna forget.
Option
I'm gonna
2.
forget what option. Yeah.
Okay. Then let's do it
It's
that
going
way.
to be hard to follow because you've got a number of options there.
Yes.
So, any comments or suggestions to the first point
Just really
that
quick,
Madison just outlined?
do you mind just saying which ones are under Article 19, which ones are under Article?
Of course.
Just listing them.
Absolutely.
So 1 you said was 19.
So option 1, option 2, option 5
are all under 19.
are all under 19. Option 3 and option 7 are under 16,
Okay.
and then 4 and 6 are not in this ordinance.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Okay.
And then Madison,
so-
another. Just for particularly me, I'm trying to follow on my laptop, etc. Is there a way you can show the section that we're talking about on the screen, or
Yeah,
is
of
that
course.
a
Let me
problem?
pull it up real quick.
It might help everybody follow along. And then what we can do is go point by point and yes, no comments, and then go to the next one is what I was thinking.
Sounds great.
Yes, let me get.
How's that sound, everybody?
Good. Yep.
Okay.
Okay, so let's see, Zoom share. Option 1, which is to eliminate
Yep.
or to get rid of 2 sets of design criteria. That deals with this Article 5 amendment, where we have struck through the Secretary of Interior's standards for the treatment of historic properties, including the standards for rehabilitation guidelines, and instead have said that we are going to default to the Appendix B Minturn design standards and guidelines, as long as the alterations are keeping within the general character of the historic property. So that way, we're only dealing with, at this point in time, 1 design guideline for the whole town, pending any other historic preservation design guidelines that the town may or may not adopt in the future. But so that the whole town is operating under the same rules, with the caveat that any historically designated structure keep within
I
the
have a-
general.
I have a question, just for me, maybe, you guys may know, but so the folks who will make the decision about in keeping with general character, would that be P and Z or is that town council? Is this P and Z?
No, this is Article 5, which deals with certificate of appropriateness applications, which
So it'd be
is
us.
HPC.
So it'd be us recommending it to council, is that correct?
No, y'all make the decision, and then y'all's decision gets put on consent agenda for council to call up if they so choose. Otherwise, you're the final decision.
Okay, and I know somebody else had a question, but just to follow that string for a second. So do we still have the back and forth, the ping pong match going on here where it's, explain to us how this doesn't go we can't decide whether it's in keeping with the general character until we see the design, but we don't really want to be, P and Z. We don't want to be duplicating that. So how does that work? And is there a back and forth that we're putting the property owner through, or is this truly a simplification and I'm missing something?
So, unfortunately, I cannot eliminate back and forth entirely. With
Okay.
multiple boards involved, that's just kind of impossible. However, I do believe that this is simplified because if it gets HPC's stamp of approval and staff, in theory, without actually having implemented this, and staff would have already compared this against our design guidelines to say whether or not, it's in keeping with impervious coverage, if it's using the materials that we prioritize in our design guidelines, things like that, then staff will have already vetted whether or not it meets with Appendix B, and it will be up to the HPC to vet whether or not it meets with the general historic character. So theoretically, staff will have already done the work pending HPC's Planning Commission's final sign-off. Anything brought to HPC should not violate the design guidelines.
And if it did, you'd be bumping it back to them before we saw it.
Before y'all even saw it.
So-
Unless they demanded a hearing, at which point that would be in my staff report of this is how it does not meet our design guidelines.
And then in terms of this, in keeping the general character of the historic property, do we need something specific in there that says as determined by the HPC, or is that somewhere else in Article 5 where it describes how we will be reviewing these items?
So since Article 5 is the article that deals with certificates of appropriateness, the process as laid out in a different section in Article 5 already says that it goes to HPC for determination.
So any of these items would come to us
Right.
under Article 5. So,
Exactly.
okay, great.
And what if the property owner didn't agree with that? What's the,
Then you deny the certificate of appropriateness, or you approve it with conditions that he does do with the things that he doesn't agree with, and you move on from there.
Can
we
they-
have, it's not a recommendation to council. It's actually, this is our job. That's
Yes.
the one job we have is we make this determination.
This is one of the, I think, two
Not the one, but
applications.
it's one of the jobs that we have.
It
Sorry.
is one of the jobs that you have technical final say pending call up from council.
Got it.
When you
Thank
say
you.
they call it from council, does that mean if the person disagrees with our finding, they could go to council and say, we want to protest this?
Not necessarily, so that's an appeal, which is initiated by property owner or an aggrieved party, whereas call-up is, if you'll notice on council agendas, we have consent agenda and regular
Sure,
agenda.
yeah.
Consent agenda has all of the DRB applications that the planning commission approved, it has minutes, things like that. And most of the time, council approves that consent agenda without discussing any of those topics. It's an implicit approval of ratifying the decisions that had already taken place. However, council does currently have the option, as long as it's within 30 days of that decision, to call up anything off of the consent agenda to discuss in their regular meeting. So if, for example, in a couple years ago, we had a house come in with a pool, and given the drought that we were in at the time, they called that up to discuss it. Another example, the cemetery
So they're
was
calling
called up.
it up out of the consent agenda.
Calling it up out of the consent agenda to discuss, to potentially amend the decision by the body that
Okay.
made the final decision. Now, an appeal, if the property owner didn't like the decision, they can certainly appeal to the town council as the board above y'all,
Right.
saying, hey, I don't agree with the decision that's been made. I would like you to weigh in on this. And that is within their right. There's a whole process and application for that. But technically, the way that this is laid out is unless an appeal or call-up is made, y'all are the final say.
And so these are, Article 5 is in regard to alterations to something that's already designated as historic.
Yes.
Okay.
And Article 6 is relocations of historically designated structures, and Article 7
I need
is
to read section
demolitions.
19.
You will need to read chapter
Yeah.
19, yes.
Okay.
Sorry for all my questions that are
No.
slowing this down.
This is an educational process.
Yeah. Any other questions or comments on this item?
No, I think this seems to
And
make sense.
Kelly, you
for
guys-
This addresses
Yeah.
option 1, I think, adequately.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. Kelly and Lynn, you guys are good. We'll just keep moving then unless we hear something. Oh, go ahead.
Just for clarification.
Mhm.
Section 19530 comes out of the design review guidelines for downtown. Or the historical preservation, which,
Section 19530 calls out Appendix B, which covers the whole town, including the 100 block.
okay. Do we have something in there that, other than this generalized statement of saying keeping with the tradition of?
No, we do not have historic design guidelines.
And the only place I worry about this is with the outside front of the building remaining as close to what it is as possible.
I think that might play into option 2 based on my conversation with Robert earlier and my subsequent conversation with Michelle. So
We'll talk about it further down the line.
I think we
It
should
also-
talk about it in the next option.
Yeah, I think I think we also have a lot of there's a lot of gray matter here in keeping with the general character. I'd argue that if you change the whole front of this, if you change the streetscape, I mean, that's the most important part of the character.
Exactly.
Right.
So we do have some place to land right here in addition to what I guess Madison's going to talk about, that she talked to Michelle and Robert about.
Yes.
And I think this is one of the major things that with the national parks
Hmm.
regulations is one of the very major things that they say. I mean, you can change the windows perhaps. You might be able to replace it with a different roof if need be. But keeping the front, is it fascia? Is that correct?
Facade.
Facade that faces the main street is one of the major things in that.
Yeah.
Just wanted to bring it up because I didn't think our code said anything.
Well, why don't we continue, Madison, and then when we get done with this next discussion, we can ask the question, does that address it?
Yeah. So option 2, eliminating potentially redundant approval requirements, deals with this, I keep wanting to say that and then I think it's going to be confusing, but I'm going to say it anyways. This altered definition of alteration. So
Which is where?
that is on page
On the screen too.
39 of the packet, which is page 29 of the ordinance. So the 50%
Definitions.
was put in there because that was what number was bandied about in the council work session. 50% is not a magic number. There is no nexus behind it. So if the HBC would like to recommend a different percentage, please feel free. Based on the conversation that I had with Robert and then the subsequent conversation that I had with Michelle this morning, maybe not as part of the definition, but maybe as part of the nomination process. The way this is written, 50% could be any 50% of the building. Front, side, rear, top, whatever. So if the goal is to allow flexibility but still protect, the important facades, potentially we go through and add as part of the process of the historic designation process, HBC to recommend to town council that the front facade and the front 10 feet of each side facade.
Or it may depend on the project. If it's
Correct.
a garage on the back of the lot that's really historic, maybe it's the back elevation.
Exactly. Just going through and allowing the HPC to determine which facades are important to keep, not to exceed 50% of the structure, because we certainly don't, if we allow the HPC to say, oh, well, all facades are important, then that kind of defeats the purpose of this current ordinance.
We won't do that.
But that way, like Lynn was saying, you can prioritize, oh, well, this sits on Main Street. This is the one that everybody goes by. So we can prioritize the front facade. Or maybe if it faces, since it a lot of the lots on Main Street also front on Boulder Street, maybe the Boulder Street side is the important facade to keep.
Or if it's a corner lot, it's the front and the side,
Right.
the side street.
Exactly. So perhaps that's a way for the HPC to recommend, hey, this facade should stay as close to the same as possible to the town council, and then the town council puts that in the ordinance that actually amends the historic register, adding it to them, so that we have that record of, hey, this is put on the historic designation, prioritizing this facade or these two facades, so that we know future, 10, 15 years down the line, somebody comes in wanting to do an addition, we're just like, great, that's awesome,
Not that wall.
but not that one. Can't touch that side, or if you do, you have to do it in an extremely respectful manner, you have to source original material, however it is. So that was something that came up in discussion today that I wanted to throw out there.
So what do you think this language would look like then?
I'm not sure actually that. So I anticipate the language to be alters, or alterations means any act or process that changes more than 50% of the exterior architectural features of a building, structure, site, or object that does not impact the prioritized facades as laid out by HPC and town council
During nomination.
during the nomination/designation process.
And somewhere in there, maybe you can put some language so that people don't feel like that's totally unguided. That, I don't know what the right language is. I was originally thinking, street view, but I don't know. It's the pedestrian and street experience with the building that we're after. I don't know what language to use,
Right.
but that we would facades prioritize facades. I don't know if it's facades or I guess it is facades prioritized based on most prominent street views or something like that. I'm trying to give some helpful language.
Maybe just visual prominence.
Yeah.
Because I'd be like, for example, the mattress building, if it were designated, the side that's adjacent to that little green space would end up being important. And that's not a street side, that's a side, which is, so it's.
Because it's visible.
Yeah. Where if
Maybe it's
on-
pedestrian. Yeah.
Where another side wall that's right up against another building, who cares, right? So.
It just pedestrian. Is that better? Well, I'm fine with what Robert said, or if pedestrian, you can throw some of these words around when you work on this, Madison, with Michelle and the team there. But it's somehow I was trying to give us some qualifications, so it's not just, hey, we think that's important. It's important from a pedestrian or from a visual. Did you say visual? That's a good word too. Somebody said that.
Can I make a comment, please?
Please do.
One thing, and I have a whole thing here, it sounds like Robert's gonna get into this too, so we can talk about it. But in the design review for the 100 block, there's talk about doing pathways, for instance, from Main Street to William Street. These two buildings have that pathway already in there that probably would need to be cleaned up, but it's in there. And perhaps those sides of the buildings there, because that's where the flowers are, that's where they talk about perhaps putting a couple tables and chairs for people to sit. It's where people walk through those two buildings. That might be another
Two
example.
buildings being 151.
Yeah.
Yes.
Holy Toledo and the mattress store.
Holy Toledo and the mattress store, yeah, but if that lot stays empty, that would be another one. And these were just narrow pathways they were talking about.
Yeah, it's something about visual or pedestrian visual, or I don't know what
From
the right
public-
language is. You
Would
guys will
public
figure it out.
view be appropriate?
Public view,
Because if,
That might work.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Publicly prominent.
where they can walk. or,
prominent
drive.
public views. Yeah, prominent
For
public
instance, the side of
facades.
151,
Visually prominent to the public.
because the one side of 151.
Yeah, I like that.
100
Yeah.
you don't see at all.
Right.
Something
Visually
like that.
prominent to the public, or to the pedestrian, or to the public. That's good. Anyway, you guys, we can't wordsmith this, but I think you've got the idea, Madison. I feel like.
Yes. In fact, I would think that rather than making all of those suggested changes within the definition of alteration, because I don't believe that it actually lives there, I think that's a criteria. I think we might be pulling in section 19430 HPC review under the designation procedure for historically nominating properties, and we would add that under HPC review, saying HPC shall recommend to council, pedestrian,
Oh, great.
visually,
Or the specific, we'll recommend to council the specific facades that
correct.
need
To be
preserved
prioritized. Yeah.
for the historic, to maintain the historic character of the property.
Right.
Like that.
So I think we would be pulling in yet another section into this ordinance to help create that.
So it
I
happens.
like that.
During the designation process, we identified these are the elevations or facades we're
Right.
wanting to preserve because they're historically prominent or important. And then based on that, then how does that affect this definition? Or do we even need,
I think we
Would it
would
be-
still amend the definition to include something saying, as long as it doesn't affect the facades as identified by HPC and council during nomination, but the actual criteria of what those facades look like would fall within for
well,
1940.
I guess the question I have is, would we only be reviewing alterations to the designated facades? Or would we let them, it's no longer historic preservation's concern about what's happening on the other ones?
Not necessarily, at least not how it's currently written. If I have direction to change it, that's perfectly fine. But say y'all only chose the front facade to prioritize. That's only, given all dimensions are equal, that's only 25% of the structure. So if somebody wanted to come in and chop off the back half and build onto the back half, then it would still come before y'all, even if it doesn't impact that front facade that y'all prioritize. I think if they want to affect the front facade, maybe that's something that automatically triggers
So
the
maybe this,
need for a certificate of appropriateness, even if they don't affect the
so
50%.
maybe you have an A and a B sub thing. A would be if it's one of the designated facades, no matter how small the alteration that comes to us. If it's one of
Maybe,
the undesignated facades, then up to 50%. And then what if it's over 50%, then they can't modify it?
No, if it's under 50% and not affecting the facade
Front
as
facade.
kind of defined tonight, then if it's under 50%, then it does not go to you. It goes to planning commission. If
Got
it is
it.
over 50%, even if they do not affect
that's
that front
great.
facade,
Okay.
they would still have to come to HPC for that certificate of appropriateness.
Then it would be like a redundant
Which option?
approval.
I don't know.
Question, Addison,
Yes.
is this also,
Number two, limited potential redundant.
I'm trying to remember back where, was option number 2 also trying to eliminate stuff, like if a person wanted to re-roof, it was such a minimal thing, it would not come before us? And
Because
it'll eliminate the hassle if someone wanted to re-roof, which,
But that has to go to P and Z for a building permit, doesn't it?
not unless they're changing the look of the roof drastically. People re-roof all the time.
was it number 2 option that was addressing that problem of if you had to replace your roof, they had to go through the process twice?
Right, because the way the code is currently set up, if you do any kind of alteration that requires a building permit, DRB permit, regardless, anything over 75 years old, you have to go through a 2-week stay. So in this case, since it does not qualify as an alteration because a roof is highly unlikely to be 50% of the
And it's more of a
outside service
maintenance.
area, then it would likely not need to do the 2-week stay.
Okay, because that's what I thought that was written into that. And, replacing a roof is one of the things that happens.
Yep.
Has to happen
Maintenance.
a lot.
Maintenance.
Yeah, which is usually, in its own category, and it's not an alteration to it
Right.
unless you're putting pink metal up or something.
I was going to say, going from metal to asphalt shingles,
But
yeah, doesn't big.
to me, it's you put metal up, it's helping the building last longer.
So from a traditionally rigorous historic preservation perspective, it should be the same material as it was previously because a roof can be visually quite prominent. Like I'm thinking of like Helen's house. Like I don't know if that's the original roof
He
style,
does.
but
He does.
But-
Well, that's the other problem is, building's probably gone through 3 or
right. So is it
6 roofs. Is it
actually
original?
still
And-
original? Yeah. And I think
Is
same
it-
too, like if you want to re-side a building, well, if 20 years ago they put vinyl siding on it.
Well, in the case of Helen's house, we found that underneath the vinyl siding, and we kept the original siding because we're excited that it had the detail.
Sure.
It had the detail in the pediment, and we were excited about all the things that we found underneath the ugly 60s Sears siding.
Right.
So it's also a joy sometimes to do a remodel and find something
Sure.
that wasn't original to what most of the neighbors are familiar with.
Yeah, and my only point in bringing that up was like, well, if you take a very traditional approach, you'd want to restore it back to whatever the original was. But
Correct.
I don't think any of the existing roofs are their original, so it's probably moot.
Yeah, I think it is.
And quite
I'm
honestly,
afraid
from
if
the
we
street
put too
facade,
much-
you don't see the roof unless you're far, far away. So
We have to remember that, if we just keep them from being demolished and we save them and we got some prioritized facades, that's huge.
Right. Right.
In our little town.
no, part of this whole plan is to make remodeling easier and
Yeah.
hopefully easier if you have a historic.
But I think the whole exercise of,
Yes.
stopping, pausing, thinking about it that we're going through, Robert, is really good. So I didn't mean to suggest that, but
And while we're on this option 2, I would I put together with Robert's help an example so that hopefully it's clear what we're talking about when we say 50%. So this would be an
Cost.
example that would go with the alteration definition. So that, let's see if I can get that bigger on that screen. There we go. So on the left, you have the original structure with the addition, And this, which is also an alteration. So with this alteration, it impacts 3 sides of the building and more than 50% of the exterior architectural features. On the right side, you have almost the same footprint. You have the original structure and you have the addition. However, they do the renovation inside the original structure. They do not touch the outside walls until you get to that back wall, at which point they build off the back. So I just wanted to vet this through y'all before this gets added to the ordinance as an example under the alteration definition, caveating that we just kind of changed the alteration definition. So I'm going to have to think that through as well.
But I think we were saying that the alteration definition, you'd have 2 of them. One, if it's one of the designated facades, then it automatically triggers, or if it's 50%. So the left-hand option would trigger our review, the right-hand option would just go to plan.
And now the left hand, if that wall on the dividing line, basically it's like 2/3 towards the front, but if that was halfway, then that would be 50%.
That would be 50%.
So if you had a diagram that was halfway through the sides
to give like little tick marks to show
and say,
where
hey,
it would be.
if your line of improvement is beyond this, then it triggers it, and if it's less than 50% on the back, I think that would be a better diagram where that, just like the diagram on the left, but it would be at 50% of the sidewall.
Okay.
And so if you're like encroaching upon this, then it's one way, and if you're in the back, then it's the other.
Okay.
I like Robert's idea. I like Kelly's idea. And I
I
also
agree.
like Robert's idea of a, having a, prioritized facade and how that would trigger as well. I don't know if you need to draw that or if it needs to just be stated, but a drawing's always picture's worth 1,000 words. Lynn, did you have something?
I prioritized the right side because I went down to 155 today and did some measurements. May I quickly explain that?
Sure.
The lot is 3750. The current side setbacks there are 4 feet on Nelson Street for some reason and basically 5 feet in the middle. So there's 10 feet between the 2 buildings. So you lose 9 feet in width, right? So it goes down to about 27 by 3750. That gives you approximately 769 square feet in the back if you take off the back room, which was suggested at one of your meetings. So both of those buildings have a small back room. And if you eliminate that from the front to create commercial in front, if that's where you were going, you'd have 10 more feet approximately. So it comes out to about 769 square feet. You'd know better because there's interior walls, exterior walls. I don't know how that whittles it down. But if that were the main foundation between there and where the cars come to park on those 2 lots, and the reason I say only up to that is because those walls are part of what's holding William Street up. There's 2 walls below those cars. So that could give you maybe a foundation of, say, 700 feet, and if you want to double, you could add on 1,400 square feet, just where that orange is in the back, and leave the rest of the lot the way it is. You'd have that walk-through between Main Street and Williams that people are looking for in their requests in the design review guidelines. You'd still have the front, which is the yard setbacks that everybody seems to love. You'd have your main building that's there right now, but it would be a little bit smaller in square footage for retail because you could be adding that onto the back. And I don't know if that works. I mean, we're talking about short-term rentals here too, so. But I just went down and measured that, and the parking spots are, our parking spots are 9 by 18, and that's 3750 across. For sure, you'd have 3 parking spots behind there still. But unless you built I don't know, with that wall coming in there, that's an architect's thing,
So I think we're talking more generally here.
right?
And
But
this
I'm
is,
giving it as an example of how that could work out.
Mhm.
Yeah, it's a good example. I think that, yeah, I think we're talking generally here, and the real thing in front of us is, do we think this tells the story? And with the discussion that we've had and the edits we have, I think it's good to have the diagrams in there.
Kelly, were you able to update yours with the 50%?
See what you think. Pass it on.
Okay, sure.
Oh, I know what I was going to say, Lynn. I lost my train of thought there. What I wanted to say in response to what you were saying is
Going down. from
I
front.
think I think our job is if we can create.
Sorry, Ken,
the-
hang on, there's crosstalk.
Oh,
It's okay.
Just a sec.
okay. Thank you.
This is the front.
Yeah.
So you're going across
50% is this.
So you're modifying these walls,
Half.
which are half of the existing
Yeah.
elevation. It's kind of our original diagram that you and I talked about.
Very
And
similar.
I think what you were trying to do with this diagram is take it over the 50%, so it's clearly more than we're at.
So this is the current building.
This would be the division, if it's one way or
So-
another.
So if this is the current building and half of the walls are preserved and half of them are removed because you're doing this addition.
Gotcha.
So if you go one way, it's okay, and you
Yeah.
preserve more of the building, if it's not, then it gets under
Right.
review.
But it could be the sort of thing where it's maybe you take that wall and you keep
Yeah.
this wall. You know, it's
It's-
like, it's,
Percentage,
And you're talking about the outside. But
yes.
by doing it this way,
so we're not.
I guess what I'm worried here is
Square
this
footage
is,
of the interior doesn't matter, it's the perimeter of the building.
Percentage of the perimeter.
Because that's what we're seeing from the exterior. So like when it says square footage, that's square footage of the surface of the
Gotcha.
building, not the
but
interior.
by doing that, this becomes 450 square feet, am I not correct?
It depends on what this building is. This could be,
Besides
this could be 2,000.
I think the key is, yeah, if I can jump in,
You're
I
talking
think the
about just
key
the
is,
outside. I got you, thank you.
I think we're only controlling the outside, and then I think our job is to come up with enough flexibility that
I understand.
that owners can do what they can do something commercially viable there.
And
When I
we
say
want
commercial, I mean
Yeah.
including short term, et cetera.
to agree, Ken, and we want to thank everybody for helping with the visual aspect. We were really struggling with
Yes, we
how
were.
to provide that, and
Yeah.
thank you to our experts who help with creating visual explanations.
And I think
It's,
Kelly
it's
it just puts it right on the boundary where this one's clearly one way or
One way or the other, yeah.
And so,
Yeah.
yeah, I think either could work.
Yeah, I wonder if just adding the 50% line like Kelly had on his description to the one.
It's
down.
just it's done in
You
one
say,
diagram
if we're
versus
here,
two.
then you'd be okay.
Right.
And again,
You know,
this
it's
is-
funny. I just want to make
this is
I just want to
citing-
make a comment watching you guys. When I was talking to Earl and I told him that I said a vision for HPC is that we become a powerful resource for the council, and you guys are doing it. This is great. This is great to watch.
Thanks, Ken.
Yeah.
And then just to be clear, so either way, well, if it's over 50%, we would review it.
Yes.
If it's under, it just goes to planning.
Correct.
And I think adding in, we're trying to, I understand. Number two is try and eliminate potentially redundant approvals, but we're actually adding this whole idea of designated facades. But I think any change to one of those designated facades of any size could be impactful. And someone could replace windows in the same character, I think would be fine. Even if they went to an aluminum clad window that lasts longer, as long as it looks like a painted wood. But I'm imagining I know Helen House isn't yet designated, but imagine if someone just tore off that bay window and put in a big picture window. It would totally defeat the historic character of that building. And it wouldn't be enough, at 50%, it wouldn't be enough to trigger it.
Right.
So I think having this, choose our facades that count, like you were saying, the front elevation that's facing a street, or if it's a side alley where people are pedestrian, that's an important pedestrian zone. But I think, yeah, it needs to happen in the initial designation.
Okay, so just so you're aware, we will now be pulling in a different section into this ordinance in order to address that, what they're just talking about, to add that as a criteria for HPC to make a recommendation to council on during the designation process, and then council to ultimately make a decision when they designate a property.
I liked that idea.
Okay.
It helped
Yep.
it to not become a free-for-all of our current design
Yep.
guidelines and to ensure the historic nature.
Yeah, otherwise
Yep.
you lose any teeth.
Yeah.
Someone could pick and choose their 50% and
Yep.
we're in trouble.
Okay, option 3, if we don't have any more comments on option 2.
We're good, I think.
Okay. So option 3, this is one of those that
Can
it
you put
pertains
it back
to.
on the screen? Sorry, when you get
Oh,
to
yes.
it.
I
Thanks.
apologize.
Thank
I
you.
will. This one's going to be extremely hard because
I
it's
know
all
it's
of those
hard.
use
I know it's
tables.
hard. Yeah,
So
yeah.
I can put
But
it on the
as you're
screen,
as
but
you're
I'll
talking
have to
through the
code it.
table, we can scroll. Hi, Michelle, by the way. I can't see you, but I heard your voice.
Hi, Ken. Good
Well,
to
and
see
really, you start out with the definitions, and that's kind of what describes it, and then it's just anything that involves residential condition, right? Then it comes up in the tables.
Right. So option 3, which is technically pertains to chapter 16, but I just wanted to make y'all all aware of it. To allow for historically designated structures in the downtown corridor to have the immediate ability to function as short-term rental on all floors. So this is specific to the 100 block A and 100 block B zone districts, which, as the code is written now, currently do not allow any residential use on the first floor unless it is grandfathered in. And so if you'll notice in the use table for the Old Town character area, you have accessory apartments, not street level, not allowed in the 100 block A and B zone districts. However, we have now added asterisks to those, along with accessory dwelling units and duplexes street level and multifamily dwelling street level, to allow for historic. Actually, let me back up. That was on a completely. I think that was option 7. So option 3 is specifically the adding of short-term rental to the use table as a use by right, like it is in all zone districts per the short-term rental regulations in chapter 7. We have now added it to the use table to all use tables, but it is specific in the Old Town 100 block areas, saying that they're allowed on the first floor. Whereas all of the other use tables just specify that historic property is exempt from the 2-year ownership requirement. Right now, currently, all short-term rentals have to be owned by one person for 2 years before they're allowed to apply for a short-term rental license, unless they're in the 100 block and have first floor commercial, at which point they can be exempt from the 2-year requirement. That is how it is currently written. What this proposes is in all zone districts, if you buy a historic structure or if you buy a structure and historically designate it, you will be able to bypass that 2-year requirement and just start short-term renting,
And
Including the 100 block on the first.
including the 100 block on the first floor.
and if I remember from the meeting, is there a parking requirement that they have to have parking for the short-term rental?
Yes, so all short-term rental licenses have to meet certain standards, such as, having smoke detectors, access, that kind of stuff. And one of the standards is that they have enough parking for the number of bedrooms that are within that short-term rental.
If I recall in the town council discussion, there was some conversation around should there be a time limit to how long someone could operate it as a short-term rental?
And the council came back and was concerned that creating that time limit really left open that continued question mark of, well, we have an initial opportunity here that will now go away in 5 to 7 years, or whatever that may be. And they were concerned that that was degrading from the value that the short-term rental was bringing. So they did not give us direction to impose a time limit. If HPC wants to provide a recommendation about a time limit, that is your all's prerogative.
I think I was the one that tossed that out, and the more I've thought about it, I don't feel real strongly about it personally. So I wouldn't advocate that we do anything on it.
Will we need to be amending the Article 6 Old Town Character 1635 then? 100 block, number B of this area is to provide convenient commercial services to residents and visitors to promote the development of the town's primary retail commercial district. Accommodations of sales tax generating commercial uses and non-street level residential units can enhance Old Town vitality while maintaining the visual character and scale. Street level space within the 100 block commercial shall be dedicated to retail sales use. Non-street level spaces within the 100 block zone may be used for compatible retail, office space, and residential. So it does definitely states that the lower level has to be retail. Now, if you were to make short-term rental considered a retail situation,
Business.
it probably would.
Because it's bringing tax dollars
Technically,
in.
it's commercial, but it's not retail.
So you could just add retail and lodging.
And lodging would be
Retail.
good.
Yeah.
Since technically they're different uses.
Yeah, but I think it needs to be covered in there, because currently it doesn't sound that
Right.
way.
Okay, then like the HPC designation process, we can pull in this section as well to make that update.
Hey, Madison, while you're doing those technical updates, I did want to suggest that you look at 19-2-80, which was actually included in the packet, which is why I picked up on it under powers and duties, and just make sure that there's nothing in there that needs to be changed with these changes.
Okay,
Thanks.
of course.
So that seems to be,
Yeah, I
it
think,
seems to address the immediate function as a short-term rental. And so no ground limit and ground floor, we just need to adjust 16,635 to
B.
include lodging.
B, okay.
you might take a look at the rest of it, but I think that's where it was mostly mentioned. The other question I have is, I know that they're doing this in hopes that those buildings might then sell and become occupied. And I know it's up to whoever the buyer would be to realize that those buildings don't have kitchens and bathrooms.
That
I mean,
is
they
up to
sort of have a bathroom.
the people who buy it.
They'd have to modify it.
Yeah.
Okay, so that is option 3. I have already said that option 4 isn't covered in this ordinance. That's the DDA operations plan. Option 5 is to require a minimum of 2 nominators for a structure to be nominated for historic designation. So the way that we addressed,
I'm sorry that I'm throwing you off tonight. But I do feel or think, Ken, when that was discussed originally with everybody, I think that we discussed, and I think you and I hit on it briefly, that if it's a property owner, that they don't have to have 2. Did
That's
we
correct.
discuss-
You do.
Yes, okay.
so.
That seems to be how it's written.
Is that, okay,
It
thank you.
is, yes. So while
Yeah,
that
I
was
think
the
it
option
is.
discussed in council, how we have interpreted that within your packet, which is page 29 of the ordinance or page 39 of the packet, depending on what you're looking at. We have added, in an application for nomination for listing in the town's historic register may be made by the owner or owners of the property or properties to be designated, or by 2 or more of the following. And so you'll notice that I've gone through and struck through or members of HPC or members of town council, and I've left it at a member of HPC, a member of town council, because when discussing with Michelle, we figured if the goal is to have two different nominators, maybe
shouldn't come
two
from the same
people
body.
from the same board shouldn't be nominators, maybe it should be a member from the board and a member of the public.
Sure.
Or two members of the public, two members of the state, however it is, but that way, only one member from each board has technically, that right on that nomination application. So that is how we have interpreted option 5, either the owner or two different people.
I think that makes good sense. My only question is,
Yeah, I agree.
why is such a long delay before we would notify the owner? It seems like as soon as there's an application, why couldn't they be nominated the next, in 10 days instead of 45?
I'm not sure. It could be that we went through and put 45 days as the time length on all things to give staff some kind of breathing room. But I
What are
agree.
you talking about?
Yeah, we don't need, yeah.
But
Need
I
breathing
agree,
room.
once an application has been deemed complete, submitted and deemed complete, I do think that it is important to nominate or to let the owners know sooner rather than later. So
Yeah.
while we weren't technically addressing that section, if it is your recommendation, I can certainly update the ordinance to reflect a shorter time period.
Or maybe if you do pick the shorter time period, say so many days after receipt of a complete application, so that it's designated, you identify that it's complete.
Like, it says so much work days or.
Right. Work days or calendar days, yeah.
They put a parenthetical and said, and to be extended to the extent staff needs breathing room.
Or how does it state in that chapter 16, says something like that?
Yeah,
Depending
I
on
think
the
it's a good idea to shorten that.
Okay, any other comments on option 5? No? Okay. Option 6, we've already discussed, is not a part of this ordinance. It's just adding a check box on the nomination application. And then option 7, to allow residential in the downtown character area in the back 50% ground floor of historically designated commercial buildings to create live-work opportunities. So that is back at that Old Town commercial, nope, that's Southtown, there we go. Old Town character area, 3 asterisk. So within the 100 block, as I stated earlier, no residential is currently allowed on the ground floor, like accessory apartments, accessory dwellings, duplexes, multifamily, etc. So we have now added 3 asterisks next to those within 100 block A and B to state,
This is on page 18 of the packet.
yes,
Yes,
residential is allowed on the back 50% ground floor of historic structures within the 100 block zones while meeting all residential parking requirements. Now, I do want to point out that this is historic, back 50% ground floor of historic structures, not back 50% ground floor of the lot area. And so, say you have a 1,000 square foot space in the 100 block, you could only use the back 500 square feet. You couldn't build, you could build an addition, but you couldn't have
Housing.
ground floor in the house. Ground floor housing, yes. Within that addition, it could only be within the back 50% of the historically designated structure. That is the way staff is proposing this ordinance. However, if HPC would like to see it 50% of the back ground floor of the historically designated lot rather than structure, so that it can apply to an addition in the back,
What
that is currently within your prerogative.
what if it was yeah, you guys are the architects in the room can answer this, but what if it was 50% of the proposed ground floor? In other words, like if somebody came in and said, "Hey, I want to expand it, blah blah blah," then they could do up to 50% of the proposed or approved or whatever the right language is.
So then would it have to say current or proposed?
Yeah, or
It
something,
would-
something, but just in concept, does that make any sense?
And
So you'd still be talking about the structure, but it would be whatever, if they're planning not to expand it, then it's fine the way it's written. But if they're planning to add on the back, then wouldn't you want to look at the building as improved?
So I think you could say just 50% of the ground floor area, whether that's the original building or an added-on building.
It does change if it's 50% of the original building and there's only 1,000 square feet, or 50% of 2,000 square foot.
Right, so wherever you end up,
Addition.
whatever building you're dealing with, whether it's with the addition or the original, that half of the ground floor could be residential. And I think the advantage there is that if somebody, say, takes one of those, like 151, and they want to turn it into a restaurant, they want to provide housing for an employee, they can expand the building and provide that housing, but still have the historic, it's
Right.
providing
what I
a
was-
benefit to whoever's trying to preserve the historic.
Which
And I think the more we can do to increase the benefit to the owner if they've been designated historic, then that opens up options for them.
Because that's one of the number one problems facing all the business owners I've talked to is employees.
Yeah, and housing.
so rather
Yeah, I like
than
that better than, I like that better than lot.
So rather than
Which-
50%
like
of the
that better.
structure or 50% of the lot, it would be 50% of the
First floor
first floor area.
or ground floor area.
Okay, so that,
Including any proposed changes that are approved or whatever.
right, so if they wanted to build on the back in addition, that would be included in the 50%. If they just wanted to
Yep.
keep it as is, then they could only
That's what
use
I
the
was
back
trying to say
50% of the
too.
building.
I said it differently.
Okay.
Yep.
Robert, can I ask a question?
Sure.
So you said we've talked about first floor and ground floor, and since we're so thick in the sausage making still, I get a little fuzzy between first floor and ground floor when I think of the old Radio Free Minturn building and what's considered ground floor versus first floor, and I feel like it gets a little fuzzy.
Yeah, because it's on a hillside, so there's a
Right.
back door that
And you
is
take
at ground
stairs up.
level, but you have to go upstairs
Right.
to get to it.
But if they excavate it out, they could potentially put another floor on that.
First
Right.
level,
Yes, and I do think we're, trying to find ways to make this easier for our historic property owners to do things.
Yeah, so I would say that's a one-story building, so it's the first floor is the only floor you have.
ground floor.
If you were to excavate and add a floor, now that's the first floor.
Okay.
So we actually have a definition for street level, which is how we have split out street level, first floor, ground floor versus everything else. We did that, I think, specifically for the 100 block when it came to deciding where a club was appropriate. And so street level means the elevation of the finished street, parking area, mall, or other circulation area open to the public. For multi-story buildings, the floor at street level shall be that floor nearest in elevation to the elevation of that point of the finished street, parking area, mall, or other circulation area open to the general public. So that is the definition that I believe was suggested by our local lawyer.
Oh,
But
the Religious Freedom of Religion Act lawyer.
Ah.
I don't know her right lawyers, so- but I like Robert's better. Okay, well, thank you. The other thing I was gonna throw out that Madison and I were trying to come up with some creative ideas, and we really hit a wall in that, we felt that we heard from council and the commission that there was not an interest in creating any type of, capped rental units. So as of right now, this section of code is hopeful that it will be used for employee housing.
I mean, that's the goal of this section, but there is nothing in this section of code that requires that. And this could
Yeah.
turn into, you know, a $5,000 a month rental unit. I'm just saying,
Sure.
and I don't have an answer for that, I just throw that out to all of you, if any of you have, and I, you know, hope that all of our business owners, and I think, you know, wanna do the right thing here, I just throw that out in case anyone else has given that any thought.
So I think you're running into a potential conflict between the desire for affordable housing, which is a bit significant one, and the desire for historic preservation. And my sense of it is from the feedback that seemed to be coming from the public and council was that historic preservation, to be effective, you need to be able to provide a significant benefit to the owner that they can capitalize on this property while maintaining that historic character and the value that's there in the historic component of the building. In that regard, I think if the way to do that is to have a $5,000 a month rental in the back, then so be it. That's providing us with our,
Agreed.
we're addressing historic preservation, not housing. And it's not to say that housing is a really important issue, it's just not our purpose with historic preservation.
And I think the historic structures will probably be in the minority of the
Yeah.
structures down there. But good for us to go into that with our eyes wide
Oh,
open.
but then again, the person who buys the home may want to live there and have a store in front.
Maybe it's their own business and they want to live there, and that's great too.
Oh, that's great.
And I think if you have, say, a bigger building, like we have those bonus floors, you know, and maybe that's where you start saying, well, if you have more than 3 units, at least one should be affordable or something. You know, like
We
there's-
do, it's at 5 units right now, but currently our affordable housing guidelines within Article 26 of Chapter 16 does say that if you are a development of 5 units or more, 20% of those units have to be deed restricted. So
there
we
you
do
go.
technically have something like
Something
that.
Yeah, that's right.
Just, it would be a surprise if you got 5 units on any of those lots down there.
It'd be small units.
Really small units. And then there's the whole water issue, which always complicates things.
I would concur with what Robert just said. I just don't think the historic structures is the place to address the housing issue, the
Since we're trying to encourage
workforce housing.
people
Yeah,
to save these
But
structures.
Michelle, I think your point is a good one, that it is a possible outcome
Yeah.
that the council should probably be aware that, you know, this is something, this is not necessarily for affordable housing, this is to promote preservation.
and I think I'd also point out that we you know, you guys have made it abundantly clear, you guys being Madison, you and Michelle, that the town doesn't have money to throw at this, so we've got to throw other things at it. And so that's also an important factor here, because a lot of towns do financially incentivize these kind of historic preservation. So that's just so we have to use the tools at our disposal.
And to that end, I really wonder whether what we've done really does turn the dial far enough for someone coming in to preserve a building or buy a building. And I kind of feel like we should probably be offering even more. And I think the 2 ways that you can give more room for development on a lot is to eliminate any parking requirements for that historic lot and decrease the setbacks for that historic lot, which are both historically accurate uses of the lot. And that there weren't very many automobiles parking on lots back then, and setbacks were smaller than they are today.
I think
So-
we were 0.
There was 0.
Yeah, so in that regard, you're, you know, drawing from the historic tradition to preserve something historic, and it's giving a bonus to someone who's preserving an amenity for the public in general. And if that means someone else has to give up their parking on the street, well, that's the trade-off. But
And
Will
I,
we look for the 4 of you to discuss that, if that's something that you want to provide as a
Okay.
recommendation to include in this ordinance?
and I
Can I ask
always,
a question before we go there? Didn't we discuss setbacks before?
We have, yes.
And
So
we
I
didn't
can,
take, I thought we took some action on that. did we not take any action on setbacks?
I can resurrect that, and add that, I believe it was a recommendation to decrease front setback and rear setbacks by 5 feet, I think, and to decrease side setbacks by 2 feet, pending, fire separation of required of 6 feet between structures, things like that. So I can certainly resurrect that and add that to this ordinance if I'm given direction to do so.
The only thing I worry about then is losing those pathways between the buildings, because it won't be wide enough. And you're only gonna have 1 or 2 downtown, and you've got a couple there that already have it. So how do you address that?
So
Well, I'm sorry, go ahead.
good, no.
So pathways between buildings aren't required.
No, but
There-
it was in the overall design plan to do it.
It was in the overall design plan to, if you wanted to get the bonus floor or incentive floor, however you wanted to term that, you could provide 2 or 3 things and get that bonus floor, one of which is that connecting passageway.
Mhm.
However, it's not mandatory that connecting passageways be provided, especially if they don't need the bonus floor.
There was also something in that bonus floor thing that says you can use the connecting passageway if there isn't a nearby pass-through street or other passageway. And so I'd argue between those two buildings, since you have Nelson Street right there, that pass-through is not as important as if it were, say, on the other side between, the Thai restaurant and 151. That'd be a more suitable place for a pass-through than between the two buildings.
It was used a lot. I had that store right there.
Hmm.
People went back and forth all the time.
Hmm.
It creates a different flow of traffic for people, and they prefer it over going down the sidewalk just because it's unique,
That's right, good. I didn't even know there was a passage there.
Yeah.
And I walked by it.
Well, right now you wouldn't because it's very overgrown, but yes, and it would definitely need to be worked on because it's been let go over the years. Nobody's taken care of it.
But as proposed, these would be incentives that people could or could not take into account, especially if, say the 2 structures that we're talking about are historically designated and it's really hard to move them, or so could you even build between those 2 structures to take advantage of that 2 extra feet on that side?
And then how does that relate to the fact that if you're talking about doing 3 sides of the building up to a certain point and then adding on, would you then create some kind of verbiage that says at this point you can go and decrease the side setbacks?
Well, I think, like, say, one of those buildings you could, I doubt they have any foundations of any significance. You could move them forward 10 feet and to the side 2 feet.
Yep.
And then build out all the way down that sidewalk at, the 2-foot reduced side setback. And you've picked up some of the front setback by moving it forward. I mean, it's all conjecture. Every building is going to be different.
Well, it's
So-
all conjecture
But it
too,
gives them
that
some
the
options.
person buying it has the funding to be able to do something like that and still maintain the original.
I mean, I think, I would think actually the best use of those 2 lots would be to combine them and then have the 2 buildings be, say a restaurant that you can go through from one to the other, and then you build out the back of the lot with all the bonus floor, 3 stories high, and
There is a restaurant by the Denver Art Museum called Cuba, which they took 2 old houses and connected them
yeah,
and made one amazing Cuban restaurant.
That sounds really cool.
yeah. So
Can I ask a question of
It could be any number of approaches, but sorry, Ken.
the architects in the room? What was the back setback, the front and back setback relief?
I
And,
believe
prior-
it was 5 feet from the front and 5 feet on the back.
I mean, would that give anything meaningful for these?
Because those are bigger.
Yeah, it seemed like it was more than that. That's what my recollection was. But whatever it is, I mean, I think we need to. I mean, it's hard not to think about 151 and 155, but is that enough? does that give a property owner enough to make that viable? And I'm asking that of the architects in the room.
Yeah, I
You're
think.
not including me?
I
Well,
would think
and
it'd be
the
more
P and Z expert. Anybody can take that. I'm just posing the question.
I would think it'd need to be more substantial to be of a significant benefit.
I think so too.
And I've always mentioned I'd love this whole board to be, give some benefits to the people owning old structures and be a positive versus a negative. So I'm all for giving them anything they can.
I mean, Michelle, maybe this is a question for you or Lynn, anybody, Madison. Would you recommend that we actually, if we want to really encourage the setback flexibility, do we propose something or do we suggest to council that they come up with something, and that do we actually go with a specific suggestion or a range, or give them some choices? What would you recommend?
I would recommend that you make the proposal for council to consider, and council can modify, approve, or deny as they might like, but giving them a starting point to think from is always a good thing to do.
Otherwise, the discussion just goes.
Yeah, okay.
Right
That
now.
makes sense.
Well,
But yeah, it makes.
we're working through a lot of good stuff.
So what would you propose, Robert, just to throw a straw man out there? What would you propose just on setbacks?
Well, because of the fire setback issue, I would say, right now the front setback on Main Street is 5 feet.
10, I think. Let me double check.
It's 5.
From the sidewalk.
And
And
then,
that's with undulation, not the whole front of the building, but.
Right, then there's a step
portion.
back in.
Right.
but I guess I would go as far as say like
Specific
three
to 100
3
block.
feet, reduced to a 3-foot setback on the front and the sides and a 10-foot setback from the rear.
Well, traditionally, old false facade downtowns were 0 setback,
Right.
but I think it's better with some undulation and a recessed entrance personally, but
Are we just talking about reducing setbacks in the 100 block or reducing setbacks for all historic structures throughout town? Because I believe that's where kind of the conversation left off was, and why we said, okay, 2 off the side setback, 5 off the front, 10 off the rear, whatever it was. Because otherwise you would have to go through and create almost an entirely new table for all of the different zone districts, saying this table applies to historically designated structures rather than this one standard relief applies to all historically designated structures.
I have an issue here, because the only 2 buildings I think that would really apply to in the front would be the 2 buildings we're discussing here tonight. and
That's
the
only
100
if it's
block.
only
Right,
for the 100 block,
and
not
if
the whole
that's the
town.
case, what people are trying to say are those 2 buildings and those trees the way they are. It seems that those trees are very important too. You can't do that if you take 5 feet off the front. So that's where what you're talking about, those are the only 2 buildings in the 100 block.
but that's a special
So how do
circumstance
you
because I
go-
know the
Is that the
proposal.
case though? I mean, there's
I think there are other
Lake
buildings.
Toledo in the 100 block, there's the
I mean-
Bellin House in the 100 block, there's the Love Shack in the 100 block.
The love shack, but that's even too bad. So I'm saying what you
I'm
have to
just
do is
saying,
be
there's more than
careful.
those 2 buildings.
You have, but currently,
Your concern is the trees.
my concern is
Yeah.
those 2 buildings being saved the way they are.
Right. And I,
Always
Well, I
historically designate the
Beyond
tree.
that,
Well,
I
and you-
mean,
well, I
Okay,
think
hold
you
on,
can-
one at a time,
you
one at a
designate the
time.
trees.
Go ahead,
There is-
Robert.
Good.
there is the point that it's not just building, it's
not.
it's
I mean, and part of the reason is those are 2 buildings that have room in the back to expand.
I'm sorry, part of
Well-
the reason.
I mean, part of the saving the trees up front, you have room in the back of those 2 buildings to expand. So it
Yeah, I
really
think our
is-
job, I would just like to make a comment. I think our job, I mean, I personally feel like our job is to thread the needle, okay, and give as much flexibility as we can. I'm not in favor of tearing those trees down or moving the setback such that somebody could cut those trees. So whatever the footage is right past those trees is what I'd say the front setback would be. But I would be okay if they wanted to pick it up and move it 3 feet forward in order to accommodate a commercial kitchen and back to make it a restaurant. You
I have
know,
one-
so that's just me personally, Lynn.
One more
Uh,
thing, Ken, and I think we have
Yeah.
to delve into this a little deeper, is from Marka, who used to own those properties, told me that the fence is actually in CDOT property easement, which means that
Oh.
front yard isn't quite as big as it looks. And that's something we'd have to investigate further.
Yeah, yeah.
Oh,
So I
Well, maybe staff could look at that and just put the, you know, if we were, you know, the question I had asked that started this was, what would you suggest as setbacks? And so, Robert, if we say the front setbacks is right past the trees,
Well, the
then
current-
what
the
would
current-
you do in the, what would you do in the back and the sides?
I mean, the current front setback is in front of the trees. I think the trees are within the buildable envelope currently
there.
I don't,
because
Are you
it's
sure?
it's a
Oh.
5 foot
It's a 5 foot
setback.
front setback.
It's only a 5 foot front setback. So I'm pretty sure those trees aren't more than 5 feet, or a portion of them, like enough that they would take them down. I mean, it does definitely say that one of our jobs is to designate building structures, objects. Those trees are objects. We could designate those trees as historic,
Well, that's an option. Yeah.
and I think they should be. I think that's an
And there
appropriate
was a
By the
previous
same-
plan to tear them out
thing. But then
when renovating that building a few years ago.
But I think too, if you were to maximize the use of that lot, what I would, as an architect, I'd recommend to a client, say, there's no foundation exists and you want to have a better foundation to preserve that building. So you can move it forward 5 or 8 feet and not impact the trees.
you will impact the trees because if you dig, those roots are gonna get damaged.
There's a limit where you could make it and it wouldn't hurt the trees.
You'd have to,
You
yeah,
have
that's
to,
something that
you'd
has to
get
be
an
done.
arborist involved, and so
Right.
you push it forward as much as you can to not impact the trees, protect the trees, and then maximize what's at the back. And if we say you don't need parking and you only have a 10-foot rear setback, now you have a substantial amount of area to build on. If you leave the building where it is and you have parking, you don't have enough room to make that a viable property.
Yeah, I actually agree with that. Yeah.
If you, well,
That's how I look
we
at
was
it from a
talking going up
developer
in the back.
perspective.
But there's not that much between the parking and the building is,
But if you get rid of that parking, would you use what's there now as the basis for a level? Because it's holding up the street.
if you excavate on your property to a property line, you have to preserve the elevation beyond it. So
Agreed.
if you're undermining it, you would have to provide a
A
retaining wall.
way to
And
do
you,
it.
is there any way, like specifically that, I could see there being parking on the parking level and doing something above the parking.
Oh, yeah.
For
like maybe
residential.
Parking underneath and then something building
Is
up.
there any
That's what I'm
way
saying.
to, for the setback thing, just say, just a generic statement that there might be an ease of setback requirements, you know, but it might vary from,
Can I make a suggestion? We're getting a lot.
but I don't know how to
We're going a
word
lot of
it
ways.
to work for every single lot.
We're working on these 7 things
Yeah.
to try to save those 2 buildings tonight, correct?
No,
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 working on
we're
it all?
working on code
We're
for
doing the whole
historic
thing.
preservation for the town of Minturn.
yes, it is not specific
It's
to any
not
property.
specific to any one property.
Okay.
Like, we should not be master planning other people's properties right now.
No, it's not a job, but we should, this is like to be encouraging homeowners to be buying these properties and giving them options
Yes.
instead of detriments.
Well, maybe we should think about taking a small bite with this recommendation and just deal with setbacks in the 100 block. And then, you know, the town could always expand that later, but you know, if we try to take too big a bite here, and just focus on what we think would be appropriate setback relief for historically designated structures in the 100 block.
So looking at the historic buildings that were in Minturn on the 100 block, I think you could say a 0 front setback and a 3-foot side setback, because that with 2 3-foot sides, you get your 6-foot fire separation.
And all this would still need review,
Yeah, you go through review, but
so
like,
it could get denied if someone
yeah.
wanted to take the trees out on that.
Right, yeah, it's not, it doesn't mean that every building's gonna go to that limit.
6 feet.
Um,
I don't know.
And then the rear, I'm just throwing these out as like, here's our point of discussion. We'll say in the 100 block, you could have a 0 front setback, a 3-foot side setback, and a 10-foot rear setback. And
Can I ask a question? Are we voting on these one by one tonight or all at once?
No, I will be taking a motion to forward with modifications this entire ordinance.
We're taking direction on these particular items, setbacks and parking. We need direction from 3 of you.
Yes. Well, my concerns are, I've been through this whole process. I've been through the community plan, which then went into the plan for the person who did the design review, that we spent a ton of money. We went through this whole thing about how people do not want 0 front setbacks.
But this is specific just to historic structures.
And that was for the 100 block. That's the historic section.
But it's not a historic district.
So-
This would only apply to historically designated structures. So at this point, there are no structures in the 100 block that are historically designated. There are 2 obviously working their way through the process, at which point this proposed setback relief would only apply to those 2 until somebody else makes a nomination and designation.
And currently on Main Street in the 100 block, 8 of 11 buildings have 0 front
But
setbacks.
they're in easements, I believe. That's what we have to decide first before we do a recommendation on this.
I'm
We have to have that clarified. Because if they're up to the sidewalk and the front of those buildings are in setbacks, just like Magusto's has problems with CDOT setbacks. You're not gonna, once those buildings come down, you're not gonna get that back.
No.
No.
But they're effectively a 0 setback. So I'm just saying visually, the experience of downtown right now on Main Street is a 0 setback. And yes, you're right, the designation of where CDOT is would move that line. But
And see, I got the feeling that that's what people didn't want through this process. They don't want it straight across the front. They want undulation going on. And if you make every one of those buildings as they get torn down and back straight setbacks, it's gonna look just the way it was, and they didn't want that.
And we currently do require 40% of an undulation for every lot. So
So you're saying not to get rid of that?
no, I'm saying that with the front setback, the primary front setback would be the 0, and then from there you pop back 10 feet. Right now it's 5, and you drop back 10 feet from there. So you just move the whole building forward 5 feet. But again, it's only those that get designated as historic. You
You're
wouldn't.
the architect, I'm the other
Well,
person. So
in
if this is
those-
the front of the building, the way that we talked about it was it would go like that. And this would be set back, and then this would be the rest up to the sidewalk, or whatever.
Yeah,
So there'd be
So the current property line would be, 5 feet forward of that. Well, I'm just saying that now you would move it to here if it's a historic building.
So rather than going through and saying 0 foot, or, because again, this is gonna get extremely complicated given the design guidelines within the 100 block. If the direction is to reduce it by 5 feet, could we not just say front setback is reduced by 5 feet so that you have the 5-foot minimum, 20-foot max, that would then become 0-foot minimum, 15-foot max. You would have, rather than the 15-foot minimum for 40% of the lot frontage, you would then have 10 feet minimum for the 40% of the lot frontage. And if you had parking in the front, you would go from 40 feet minimum to 35 feet minimum. And same with the 100 block A incentive floor, you would go from 25 feet setback
I see
to
what you're
20
saying.
feet.
So just move the front in the 100 block,
Just reduce it all by 5
reduce it all by 5 feet.
And I personally
If that
don't think
makes
it'd be
sense.
appropriate to move those houses, because they're residential, all the way to the sidewalk. In that particular application.
No, I mean, we lose the trees too, which
Yeah.
we don't want to lose.
It just seemed like we're doing this all over again. and we just paid to have this all done. And
Was
I
it
don't
done-
know whose position this is. Is this HPC's or is this planning and zoning? Or is it council? I just think it needs further discussion. I'm sorry, that's how I feel tonight. I think this is something I didn't expect to get delved in. I haven't really thought about it. I went through all this. I went through this to see what it related to. Changing setbacks through this, I think there's a lot of further discussion on how that relates. I think we need to clarify where those buildings are and where those setbacks should be. I know you don't think the same way, that's fine.
we can't base our recommendation on 2 structures.
No.
It
No.
has to be on
But
the
I think it
entire
means on
zoning
the whole
strip.
street. Because what came out of that community plan and what came out of this was people didn't want buildings straight across like they are.
And we don't have enough historic structures for it to end up that way.
Every structure.
Currently. I mean, all those buildings down there, I guess you could consider, they're all 75 years or older.
Is Country Club?
No. Yeah,
Well, Country Club can't be redone. See, that's the whole thing too, because it was different at the time. It was a 2-story stone building, was it not?
Yes, cobblestone.
Yeah. And now it's not. So that really doesn't apply for this.
So I think we are
I
sort of
think
running into a dilemma. I would say, can we approve this agenda item for what we've
Yes.
reviewed?
Right.
That's what I'm
The second thing was
suggesting.
an addition.
And then we can make a proposal for a town council to consider reducing setbacks, reducing parking for historically designated buildings. And here's a starting point of how you might consider it. But recognizing this isn't a final, it's gonna go get reviewed by planning commission, it'll get reviewed by town council. But just to say, as far as the historic preservation committee is concerned, we'd like to see providing a greater economic benefit to people who are trying to preserve buildings. And this is one way that we see that it could work.
And I could see reducing setbacks on the backside if, or at backside of the building that's not the facade, because that's where you're adding to. It makes more sense to me.
Well, I'm just thinking of, like, for example, the mattress building, if someone wanted to preserve that, that is on a 0 setback. And I know where that pin is, it's like less than a foot from the front property line. So would they have to move that back if they modified the building? Or could it remain? So I guess what I'd like to say is, let's stay focused on what we have here tonight and get that addressed, and then we can decide if we want to, as a committee, to propose some additional benefits to someone who's preserving a historic property. And it's a proposal, it's like
I
Michelle
would
said.
like to see us first take the money we have and identify the historical properties, that the grant we have, and see what properties that would affect.
Which we're in progress of.
Which we, I think are.
Well, I don't know that that's, I
I just like to do
think
what
that's,
Robert's saying. Let's deal with what we have in front of
Yeah.
us tonight.
Exactly.
And
I agree.
not start a whole nother thing until, I mean, we've got the money to decide how many buildings down there really are.
Okay.
And what buildings are.
Can I make a suggestion, Madison? Why don't you take us to the next item, and then let's, after we entertain a motion on all of these proposals, then we'll have a quick discussion about whether we want to also make a proposal on parking and setbacks.
Okay, so the direction that I have is in option 1, eliminate the requirements for 2 sets of design review guidelines. There would actually, no, that's staying as it is. Option 2, eliminating potentially redundant approval requirements. I have the direction to clarify or actually pull in the HP or the historical designation process to give HPC the ability to recommend a facade or multiple facades as priority
Up to 50%.
up to 50% of the building. And so if
Exterior.
if someone wants to make an alteration, as it would be either you touch that specific facade and you're automatically going to HBC, or if you alter more than 50% of the exterior structure, at that point you go to HPC for a certificate of appropriateness.
Great. Sounds good.
For option 3,
Hey, do we? Oh, sorry. Go ahead. It just
Yeah.
if we have do we really does HPC care if it doesn't affect the historically significant facades that we designate? Why are we involved?
I think
I
there's.
mean,
the
I almost want to put a period after, the historically significant facades. If it affects that, it comes to us. If it doesn't, it doesn't come to us. It doesn't need to. Does it?
I
Am
think
I
there is.
missing something?
Yeah, there's the potential risk that if someone did a massive re-addition, that it could.
Oh, okay. You're right. Sorry, Robert. I forgot about that discussion. Go ahead, Madison.
in option 3, I am pulling in the intent statement for the 100 block, section 16635B, and amending that to allow short-term rental within the 100 block on the ground floor rather than just retail, so it'd say retail and lodging. And Ken suggested that I double check the powers and duties section of chapter 19 to ensure that that is covering, I think, both option 2.
I just noticed there might be a couple things that need to be, deleted or changed in there when I was
Okay.
reading through it, but you can look at it based
Option
on what we just
4,
discussed. Yeah.
Option 4, nothing. Option 5, I have Robert suggesting that we change the notification, the property owner notification timeline to 10 business days after receiving a complete application. Option 6, I don't have anything. Option 7, I have 50% of the proposed ground floor area rather than 50% of the historically designated structure for live work residential on the first floor. And so those are the directions that I have on the options presented to you tonight, not addressing
Plus-
anything about setbacks or parking.
Plus Madison, somewhere in there, I think you also have some graphics, right?
Yes, I have graphics under
Diagrams.
option
Yeah,
2.
great.
And add the 50%.
Including Kelly's 50% comment.
Yes.
What about the 16635 adjustment to the code?
Yes, that's an option 3.
Thank you.
So Madison's just given us an overview. Madison, at this point, do we look for a motion to approve it, assuming we're done discussing?
Yes, if y'all are done discussing substantively, then I would request a motion, and this would be discussion on this topic entirely. Like, we're not you can discuss any conditions that you would like to add to it, but after the motion is made, seconded, and voted on, we are done with this topic. Like, that's how it typically, so if y'all have anything else y'all want to discuss about setbacks or anything like that, now would be the time.
So.
Oh, so we can't come back to, what I'd like to do is suggest that we approve it subject to a further discussion on the second topic, but I would like to get this approval done. Can we do that, Madison?
Since that would be a different agenda item that was not on tonight's agenda, it
Good.
came up in the flow of this conversation relevant to this ordinance, but once we are done with this ordinance, then that
Okay.
is the end of that discussion for tonight. We can certainly put it on a future agenda item.
Could it fall under agenda item 11, Historic Preservation Commission comments, that we're making a comment to town council that we would like to see greater benefits?
As long as it remains a comment and does not become a discussion, yes.
Okay. So
Well, here's what I would suggest. Let me throw something out and see if it resonates. So could we within our approval and make a motion to, I'm just trying this out, a motion to approve with the changes, the number of items that we had before us with the changes you just articulated, Madison, plus a recommendation that council look at the parking and setbacks and endorsing as a straw man for consideration the setback formulations that you articulated. What does that sound like to anybody?
If you are making a recommendation that council look at something, typically it is you are recommending language for them to look at, not just a general topic for them to look into. And so if like Michelle said earlier, if you're wanting to council to investigate or look into setbacks, I would presume that there would need to be some language about that setbacks, those setbacks added to the ordinance for council then to amend, approve, deny, completely remove from the ordinance if you were wanting council to look at that.
Yeah, and I guess what I was making something specific. I was suggesting that we use the methodology that you last articulated, which was, I believe, less 5 feet.
Okay.
And then I was also on parking, that they consider not having a parking requirement for the historic designated buildings in the 100 block.
So
I just tossing, I'm not making a motion. I'm asking the group how people
Do we
feel
not-
about that, or are we on?
Does that code for the historic not say there is no parking required for the retail businesses, whatever? And nothing for, if there's businesses on the second floor, that the only parking required would be is if there was a living quarter in there,
correct.
which you can't get rid of that,
Why not?
because the person has nowhere to park. I'm sorry, I mean, we have it down to like one per residence, I believe,
Yeah.
We do.
which is
Okay.
just fine.
So I think
The
those
parking
are-
lot is already packed between the saloon, the grill, and the Eagle River Inn. There's rarely parking there. You're gonna have no parking in downtown. We just got rid of all those street corners because we had to do bulb out or backups or whatever. And I can tell you what, Pine Street has no room left either, especially on the weekends. So.
What if we dropped the parking and we just focused on the setbacks as articulated by Madison? Excuse me.
You know, the one thing that, I'm sorry, Ken, the one thing that I've learned.
Yeah, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
The
Sorry.
years that I've had is this we know, we've talked through this, we agree with this. Now there's gotta be a new conversation. And as Scott always says, we can talk about it further, and even at the other meetings, let's get this into the code. We can always work it if we need it, and they've said that on council too. So I think we've got time on that discussion at the moment. I mean, I don't think there's other buildings down there. If you're talking about strictly the 100 block, this took months, this took a year. And I could not vote on that until I read this again, quite frankly. I need to refamiliarize myself with what we did there and what we're talking about now, instead of just making a jump. And that's just me, and if I'm sorry, it's my first night here, but I've been through this, we've worked hard, and we worked really, really hard on that. We went through a lot of meetings like this. We didn't do it the first time. I mean, it's something we can discuss, yes, but I came prepared for this tonight. And I did my homework, and I did my studying, and I think we did well on that. I'm
Mhm.
sorry, Michelle, I'm sorry,
So I
you're all bored.
well, I propose these options, and this is just for the downtown area. But in the future, love to investigate benefits that we can give designated buildings for the rest of the town.
Sure.
And I think that would be more pertinent about setbacks and parking, because it's not as high density as the downtown should be. But I would love to give encouragements for all the other people that have 75-year-old buildings in town and want to buy or have it and want to remodel, want to do addition. And what could we give them to make their life easier for owning a historic building? So I'd like to discuss.
Well, what if we, go ahead,
As
Kelly, go ahead and finish.
I did.
Sorry. It's hard to be on Zoom. Go ahead, Kelly.
I'm done.
Oh, okay. All right. Did you have anything to add, Robert?
I guess I can just provide a Historic Preservation Commission comment at the end, and I'll just make my suggestions there, and that can, would that go to town council?
It would not.
No.
No, we need 3 of you to give that direction to do that. As direction from the board,
Right,
we can say Robert recommended, but it would not be direction from the
sure,
the commission.
right, and I guess I'd like to get the communication out that I think we need to provide greater incentives for people to preserve properties, historic preservation properties. And I think 2 ways you can do that is by reducing parking and reducing setbacks. And maybe at this stage, the thing to do, I know you wanted us to give specific language, but we could say, it's sort of like what we did with the last special, where we gave them options. And then they said, no, we don't want to think about that option. They can kick it back to us to discuss the specifics, but just say, we are interested in providing greater benefits. We want to offer another option. And that may involve reducing parking and or setbacks. And is town council interested in that? And it may be unanimous that, oh, parking's off, we don't want you looking at parking, that's decided. Or we think the setbacks are fine, so don't worry about it. But if we get some direction from council that they are interested in this as a way to promote historic preservation, then great, we'll come back to it at our next meeting, and staff can come up with some language that would work within our code, and then we can discuss it.
And if you all provide direction to take additional options for future consideration to council, in order to get direction from council, we can do that.
Okay, so how about this? I will make a motion that we adopt the ordinance amending chapter 16 and 19 with the changes that Madison described for us that we all agreed on
options 1 through 7.
on 1 through 7, and then to offer to town council that we're interested in exploring other ways to promote historic preservation by making it more economically feasible for a property owner, by potentially reducing required parking and or setbacks,
Or other options.
or if council has other options.
I was gonna say, could we just end it as per going to,
Look at
just
options.
look at options, period, and then go from there.
Okay, hold on.
But I'd
Hold
like
on.
to hear
So
from
are you
council
finished with
is-
your motion, Robert?
I'm sorry. So the reason I'd like to make it specifically setbacks and parking is that it gives something for the council to consider. If they don't want to consider those things, they can say, take that off the board, and we can come up with other options. But
This would be for the rest of the town.
this would be for any historic preservation project. That would they like
Okay,
us
so we have a,
reducing setbacks and reducing parking requirements on historic properties. That's my motion.
okay, Madison, you got that?
I do.
Okay, so we have a motion. Is there a second?
I'll second it.
Or any discussion, I should
Conversation, but
all.
I would not like to include it in tonight's motion.
This is for the future.
So you'd rather not present to the council that we have some options to consider?
I think that's something we can bring up after this is settled, after we vote on this. I think that can be a separate thing, because there's other things that I'd like to discuss in there. I hate to just name those 2. If you want to say just options, I'm fine with it. But if you want to say parking and setbacks.
If you want to add, do you want to add something to it?
Right now, I just like to leave it options and give myself time to think about what other options we might have. Because I know what's in there, and I know what I heard at meetings, so I'd like to think about it a little bit.
Well, and this isn't binding by any means. We're just asking for their direction if they want us to consider those things.
Well, I know that part of that was brought up once before, and I know the results it got from other people, so. Would I like to add something? Possibly, but I need to think about what else can we offer them. I really think parking is one of the worst. I don't mind the setbacks as much, but the parking, I think we've gotten rid of enough parking in this town already. Kelly doesn't have a place.
Would,
Talked about that. Our streets here.
Robert, would you consider modifying your motion to delete parking and just include
Sure.
an example of setbacks?
Thank you.
So why don't
Other options.
we do
All
that?
right, do I have a second? Do I have a second for that? You
Okay,
following
so-
me,
so
Madison?
I just modified my motion, so approving the ordinance amending chapter 16 and 19 per our discussions with the changes that Madison outlined, and then offer an additional option to town council to consider in order to promote historic preservation by providing increased economic incentive for property owners by reducing setbacks. And if they have other
Right.
suggestions, then we're open to.
And
those.
other options,
Yeah.
is that,
Or
Or
other
other
options.
options.
or other
Yeah.
options.
Okay, do we have a second?
I'll second it.
All in favor?
Aye.
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 All right, motion carries. Madison, did you catch that? Did you have any questions, clarifying questions or anything?
I do not. I caught it.
Great, thank you.
Okay, great. All right, well, good work, team. Let's move on through the rest of the agenda quickly here. We don't have any discussion or direction items. We don't have any staff reports. Do we have any other Historic Preservation Commission comments that are in addition to what's already been discussed? Okay, any future agenda items other than what's been discussed?
May I ask a question?
Please.
Have we found somebody to do that survey? For the-
Yes. Yes, we are working on a
Yes.
contract with them right now.
Great, thank you.
I think that idea of identifying the properties up front could be really helpful.
And
Yeah,
it-
so assume that'll show up on a future agenda item, correct, Madison, when you get to that place, but it's in process, right?
Yes, there's some things that we'll need to do initially, but it was part of the RFP that there be a kickoff meeting with HPC, as well as a couple of meetings throughout the process, so that y'all will be
Okay.
kept in the loop.
Okay, great. Okay, well, I'll take a motion to adjourn.
I make a motion to adjourn the Historic Preservation Commission meeting of August 2024.
I'll
Great.
second
We
it.
have a second? All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Aye, everyone. Okay, we are adjourned. Thanks again.